Lielsan Chamaniabu ke Chamalea to Itaiwai. Hi everyone. So just over 2 weeks ago, I had the honor of attending the 6th annual Rethinking Thanksgiving webinar. Colonialism is the problem, solidarity is the answer. It was a powerful space led by Indigenous and allied organizers, and I felt it was important to share the recording here so more people can hear these voices and support the work. The webinar featured Evie Reyes-Aguirre from Tonatierra, Cindi Martin from Indigenous Interpreters Organization, Nisrin Elamin from Sudan Solidarity Collective, and Lara Kiswani from AROC, the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, with interpretation support and guidance of an amazing moderator and ASL interpreter. We also want to uplift and the sponsors and the community that came together to help raise nearly $10,000 to support Indigenous organizing, solidarity movements, and cross-community liberation work. So I'm sharing this video to help continue that message of solidarity. So feel free to check the links below to donate, learn more, or sign up for the organization's email list. Let's keep supporting Indigenous sovereignty, land, and water protection and collective liberation. I hope you all enjoy this webinar. Toalio san chumeo que te siabu in leo sa puen chiman. Chocola.
everyone, and welcome. Thank you, Curtis, for the beautiful music. Curtis resides on the Onondaga Nation, south of Syracuse, New York, and he is a self-taught flute and harmonica player. Gracias todos y bienvenidos. Gracias, Curtis, por la música hermosa. Curtis reside en la nación Onondaga, al sur de Syracuse, Nueva York. Es un flautista y armonicista autodidacta. I want to go over accessibility for today's webinar. I will now give instructions for how to access the Spanish interpretation for the webinar. Antes de comenzar, quisiera repasar las características de accesibilidad para el webinario de hoy. Si desea escuchar a este webinario en español, favor de seleccionar el icono del globo terráqueo en la barra del menú al fondo de su pantalla. En su celular, presione los 3 puntos en la parte inferior de su pantalla y seleccione el idioma deseado. De aquí en adelante, si tiene dificultad accediendo al canal de español, pida ayuda en el chat. The ASL interpreters will be spotlit throughout the webinar, and we also have live captioning during this webinar thanks to Corvin. To view captions or a full transcript, click the CC icon on the Zoom menu bar, and we will also include a link to a document that shows how to access captions. If we have any technical issues with Spanish or ASL interpretation or live captions, we will pause the webinar to correct the issue and make sure everyone can participate. Please reach out in the chat with any accessibility questions or concerns. And when a speaker is presenting, we ask that you only use the chat for access-related issues. Lastly, if you have questions for the presenters, please post those in the Q&A feature in the Zoom menu bar. I'll just give people a moment for that, and then we will move on. So, hello, my name is Anayance Garza. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm calling from unceded land of the Estokna people, also known as Somisek in the Estokna language, and so-called Texas by settlers. I will be moderating today's program, and I'm wearing a gray blouse. I have a sweater with geometric shapes on it, and I have dark glasses. We're pleased to welcome you to the webinar, Rethinking Thanksgiving, Colonialism is the Problem, Solidarity is the Answer. I'd like to invite people right now to ground ourselves in our bodies as we prepare for this panel. So if I invite you right now to take a deep breath with me, breathing in and breathing out, to connect ourselves to our body. Colonialism is the problem, solidarity is the answer. We chose this year as the theme in order to acknowledge the resilience and years and generations of work and the ways of life that connect us to each other, to the water, and to Grandmother Earth. We've been strong through our storytelling, through our life ways, our relationships with food, honoring language and communication. We're nurturing our life strategies, not just survival. And this solidarity makes us stronger. All of this is happening amidst the extreme challenges, suffering, violence, genocide, ecocide that stems from the colonial strategies that have been negatively impacting our communities and our peoples since first contact on Turtle Island, on Abya, on every continent on Grandmother Earth. And we're here to support each other today. Again, I just want to please just remind everybody that please only type access-related questions in the chat while our next presenter is speaking. I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Evie Reyes-Aguirre with Tonatierra. She's a community activist and advocate for social and environmental justice who represents the Iskaloteca Mexica peoples, based in so-called Phoenix, Arizona, which is the traditional territory of the O'odham peoples. Through the work at Tonatierra, Evie has spent decades working on issues affecting Indigenous peoples, and Evie emphasizes the importance of grassroots organizing and building sustainable solutions to address systemic inequalities. Evie also represents her community annually at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, where she has served as a co-chair and rapporteur for the United Nations Global Indigenous Peoples Caucus and the Women's Caucus. Evie.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who has taken the time to join us this year, once again, at our annual Rethinking Thanksgiving webinar. Amishvan cinco no anyolke, no toca o selosochi, iwan ikanawat. My name is Eve Reyes-Aguirre, and I just introduced myself in my traditional language. As Anayanse mentioned, I am residing here in O'odham Territory, also known as Phoenix, Arizona. And I wanted to talk a little bit about land acknowledgement and why it's important and how we can all know what territory we're calling from. But first, again, I'd like to welcome all of our relatives, whether you're here and it's morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're at on Mother Earth. Know that you are residing on Indigenous territory. And with that being said, we wanted to make sure that if you didn't know whose territory that you are residing on, how important it is for you to know, because the history of the land is so important where we reside. And so we wanted to share a website with you all so that you can find out what Indigenous territory you are residing in. And the website is native-land.ca. I believe we'll be dropping that in the chat for folks to be able to look up where it is that you reside and whose territory you reside on. And so the reason why it's so important is because this land has history, the history of the people who cared for it before colonial settlers arrived. And this goes wherever it is you are around the world. Colonization affects all of us. Even the descendants of the colonizers themselves are affected by colonialism and colonialism and colonization. And that is why we named this webinar this year, Colonialism is the Problem, Solidarity is the Answer. I want to also thank our sponsors. We have a large list of sponsors who have come out and showed their solidarity and support. And we'll be sending out a toolkit with all of the information on all of the sponsors. But the reason why I bring this forward is because it is the perfect example of solidarity. The issues that we speak about and the fight that our ancestors have been in for over 500 years since colonialism presented itself on our territories here, on Turtle Island, Abya Yala. Since then, we recognize the importance of knowing our history and the people's history of that territory, of that land. And so we recognize that land acknowledgements have become kind of an empty gesture. However, there are things that we can do to rectify that. And the first thing to do is to just know where you're standing and know who those caretakers were before your people arrived to that area. And so with that being said, I wanted to talk a little bit about Tonatierra and the work that I do here with my community in O'odham Territory. We do a lot of local work, grassroots organizing around various issues, including environment, Indigenous rights, human rights, the rights of Mother Earth, and what we can do to organize ourselves to carry forward the legacies of our ancestors that came before us. Part of that work is solidarity work. As a matter of fact, the majority of the work is solidarity work, because as a grassroots organization, we recognize that we can't do this alone. We have to have our allies with us. We have to have our community with us. And really, the people are the ones who have to lead this fight. All of the fights that we're in, whether it's environmental or Indigenous rights or water rights, they are rights that protect all of us, whether we're Indigenous or not. When I started this work, people would call me an activist or an Indigenous activist, and it's really not just about Indigenous peoples anymore. And I think we are at a turning point in our time, in our society, where people who are non-Indigenous are recognizing the harm that has come to all of us, not just Indigenous peoples anymore. And so while we look at environmental rights and water rights, and we use these words like these terms like water protector or sacred site defender or human rights defender, land defender, all of those don't necessarily belong to an Indigenous movement anymore, because we are seeing our relatives standing up with us, and we are seeing us all fight back together collectively. And that is the only way that we can be successful in the work that we do. One of the organizing tools that we use is something called collective rights. And the reason why collective rights are so important is because they are rights that belong to more than just one group of people. And they are rights that you can defend when we are being marginalized. It's a way for us to uplift our voices. It's a way for us to carry forward the magnitude of the feelings that and the impacts that we are feeling in our community. It's a way for us to really put our voice together as one. And we've seen how important collective solidarity is, collective rights are in the movement. Our Palestinian relatives are a perfect example of how important it is for us who have the ability and the privilege to speak out against the injustices that continue to happen to their people. It's important for us to use that voice. It's important for us to use our privilege, whatever it may be, to fight against these kinds of injustices. I think that as we look at what's happening in our communities, we are seeing that we are under attack. And it's not just brown people and people of color anymore. Everyone is being attacked. If your water is being attacked, you are being attacked. If your territory, the land that you stand on, is being threatened by corporations, data centers that require so much resources to function in your community, you will be the ones who will feel the effects of that. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, an O'odham territory where data centers are becoming a big, big part of society here, part of our community here. And we're recognizing that those data centers are going to be needing to use a lot of water. And most people know that in the desert, water is very scarce. And it's gotten to a point where we're having these huge data centers that are being built. And we're wondering, how sustainable is this for our people here in this city, for our communities? Because we are in a desert where water is very scarce, and these data centers use so much water. They use so much water and take up so much land and resources from community. And it's not us that benefit from it. It's not the community members that benefit from it. It's the corporations that are making money off of it. And I know AI seems to be the cool thing that a lot of our people, and young ones especially, have been gravitating towards and using it. But I don't think people understand the real effects of what it means to use AI. The amount of water that it uses just to ask one question in an AI format it's just so extreme. It's unsustainable. And while it may seem like a good idea for the moment, in the long run, it's going to be very detrimental to us as a people, to everyone in your community, because we all are going to struggle to have clean drinking water. And we're also seeing a lot of our farming lands here in Arizona are disappearing because these data centers need places to exist, and they are massive. And so they're looking in the rural areas of here in our hometown, they're looking for areas to build their data centers. And it just so happens that the areas that they're looking at is farmlands. So many of our farmers, our local farmers, and even some of our big growers, their land's being threatened by data centers. And so it's very important that we're aware of how all of these things are affecting us, because we are also a part of that. We're a part of this system, unfortunately, this colonial system that has forced us into using some of these tools to bring forward these messages of injustice and messages of solidarity. And the fact that we're on a Zoom call right now using the internet is very ironic, right? And it's a very telling about how difficult it is living in a system, in a society where we have to kind of use some of these tools in order to spread awareness and find better ways to do things together. And there are ways. When we talk about rethinking Thanksgiving, we know the story of when colonists arrived to this territory. We know the story that we were taught about Christopher Columbus. We know the story of the Pilgrims and the Thanksgiving feast. And we now know the story, or I should say, we now know the truth about those stories. We know that it was not a peaceful relationship. We know that the Indigenous peoples were slaughtered and massacred and enslaved in order for the colonists to survive here on our territory. They learned from us. We brought them in. We taught them how to feed themselves, how to grow food in these lands, how to hunt, all those things that they needed to survive. When they arrived, we were the riches. We were the ones who had all the riches because the land provided everything that we needed. And once they figured out how to dominate us, they took all of that away. And we know this history, right? Our kids are learning this history because a lot of our generation, my generation especially, stood up and demanded that the truth be told and taught to our future generations, to our young ones. That was so important because we are learning, especially now with this administration, that what you put out there is what people will receive and what they will remember, which is why it's so important for us not to believe everything that we see, everything that we read, everything that we hear. We have to question, where are we getting this information from? Who are the sources? What benefit do they have by feeding us, spoon feeding us information that isn't real? As much as people have issue with this administration, they introduced us to the concept of fake news. And unfortunately, it turned on them, or I should say, fortunately for us, it has, because now we have to question everything that we see, everything that we read, every little bit of information that comes to us. We have the opportunity to question it and to find out the truth and the facts about what it is that's really going on. And what we're seeing right now is that corporations and people with money and greed and power are looking to get more of that at our expense, at the expense of regular people in regular community. But with that being said, it's really important we remember they are also people. The only power that they have is what we give to them. The only recognition that they get is what we give to them. And so we need to recognize that there isn't just colonial law, there's indigenous law. Okay, there's natural law. And those laws, especially the natural law, supersedes any colonial law that's written in the books. There is no controlling Mother Earth and what she's going to do to us and our communities. And we're seeing it happen. Unfortunately, Indigenous peoples are the first ones to see the devastation. And we all have a front seat to that on our phones through social media. We're seeing the devastation that's not just happening to marginalized people around the world, but also to their territory, to the land. We talk about the genocide in Gaza. We talk about the injustices that are happening. But we also have to look at the devastating effects that the war is causing on the air, on the land, on the water, and that territory. The poison that is seeping into the earth from all of the bombs and the phosphorus gas that is going into the air and the water. It's important to know that we have to be realistic about all of these things that we are being told are for our own freedoms and our own protections. We have to be able to see past the lies that they're feeding us. And Mother Earth is the one who's going to show us the truth. And she is, through the hurricanes, through the extreme weather, through the melting of our icebergs up in the north. Our Alaskan relatives have lost their entire territory due to devastating effects of climate change. And this is just a piece of what's to come. This is why solidarity is the answer. We have to work together to find solutions to these issues. And the reason why we like to focus on rethinking Thanksgiving, and I'm really grateful to all of our allies, our relatives that have put this webinar together, because they recognize the importance that Indigenous history has given to us today. They recognize that we as Indigenous people lived in harmony with Mother Earth since time immemorial. It's only been in the last 500 years, and even more so in this so-called US, in the last 100 years, we have seen the devastating effects that colonialism has had on our people. And we're seeing it even more so now with AI. It's going to accelerate rapidly, these devastating changes. But the history is there and the answers are there. Indigenous peoples, through their traditions, through their culture, through their understanding that we are not here to dominate the earth, but we are here as a part of it. That is the first teaching. That is the first teaching, is that we are no less important than the dogs walking on the street, than the birds flying over our head, than the animals whose water is being contaminated out in the wilderness from various mining corporations, right? We have to recognize that they are important just like us. We are just like them. There's no difference. There's no difference at all. And so knowing that there is solutions to the issues that we are dealing with every single day, knowing that Indigenous peoples have the answers, it's going back into balance with Mother Earth. It's recognizing the importance of what we do on a day-to-day and how we live our life. What are we doing that is contributing to the devastation, And what can we do to fix that? What can we do to fix that? Now, the answer is great, and I can't give it to you in a 2-hour webinar. It's something that we have to look at based on where we are in our community, where we are in this world, right? Where we are on this Mother Earth. Some of us are close to the ocean. Some of us are by the desert. Some of us are in the highlands. We're all in different environments. But Indigenous peoples lived in all of these places, and they knew how to live in balance. They still do. They know how to be a relative to Mother Earth and not a dominator. That has never been the way. That has never been the answer. It's not to take more than what we need. It's to take only what we need and leave everything for everyone else. That is the issue that colonialism has brought to us, that has been the problem, is they don't have that understanding. Instead, the greed has taken hold, the power has taken hold. How much more do they need? How much more can our Mother Earth take? How much more will our future generations need to sacrifice? The answer is solidarity is the answer. We need to come together. We need to find solutions. And I really encourage you to look at the website, native-land.ca. Find out whose territory you're on. What are those communities doing in your area? After this webinar, you'll receive a toolkit. And in that history, that toolkit will have the history of our Rethinking Thanksgiving and all of the work that we've done up until this point. But you'll also get a list of all of the organizations that are doing amazing work throughout Turtle Island, throughout even Mother Earth. We have organizations that are in solidarity with us all across Mother Earth in various so-called countries, right? But they're not. They're just Indigenous peoples like us trying to live in balance as well for their future generations. And now when we talk about future generations, it's not just Indigenous people's future generations, it's all of our future generations. So again, I'd like to thank you all for your time, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it over back to Anayanse.
Thank you, Evie, for reminding us about our actions and how our actions are affecting each other and how we're in relationship with each other and Mother Earth, as well as the mask of, comfort that sometimes is presented to us but can cause devastation, like the AI and the data centers. Our next presenter is Cindi Martin. And again, I just want to remind everyone, please only type access-related questions in the chat while Cindi is presenting. There has been instructions linked into the chat on accessibility. And so we're going to continue with Cindi Martin. Her pronouns are she, her. And Cindi is an Anishinaabe deaf woman from Red Lake Nation, raised in South Minneapolis, a respected activist, educator, and cultural leader. She has dedicated decades to advancing equity, access, and visibility for deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing communities. Her work is grounded in cultural humility, language justice, and deep community connection. Martin is a sought-after ASL and deaf cultural consultant, contributing to a wide range of projects from stage productions like The Guthries for the People to documentaries such as They Didn't Deserve to Die and many others. Her consulting spans theater, film, education, and community programming, centering deaf and Indigenous perspectives through storytelling, accessibility, and authentic representation. Storytelling remains at the heart of Cindi's work, and she believes it's a powerful tool to foster understanding and collective healing through outreach, advocacy, and creative collaboration. Martin continues to work towards justice and belonging for all. In her free time, she enjoys being with family, volunteering locally, and Martin is also the managing director for Indigenous Interpreters Organization that provides culturally grounded ASL interpretation and accessibility services at Native events to ensure full participation in ceremonies, powwows, conferences, performances, and beyond. Thank you, Cindi, for being with us.
Angela, do you mind unmuting yourself?
Hello, bonjour, everyone. My name is Cindi Martin. My sign name is this, as you can see. I learned from you, and my sign name means poem, and I just love poetry. I love writing it. I love reading it. It's the best spirit. It's the best medicine that there is, and that is why that name was given to me. So as far as being BIPOC, being an Indigenous woman and other BIPOC people, that name was given to me by them, by different people. And so I was really honored. That's why I'm so honored and I always talk about that name. My native name is Ninkusa Amud. And what that means is hummingbird in the wind. So if you can imagine a hummingbird fighting against the wind and having it hit in the face and really struggling against it, my heartbeat is so strong, and fighting against that and fighting against what I need to move through in the world, my culture, my life, my people. They've all taught me things like how to drum, which I absolutely love drumming. And so that's also what that means, is it's the heartbeat beating against the wind, like the drum. Recently, I've been doing a lot in the Deaf and Native communities, trying to make sure that our spaces are accessible. And I'm so grateful for my brothers and sisters from South Minneapolis. I'm an Ojibwe woman from or Anishinaabe or Ojibwe. Means we the people. And our tribe is Red Lake, which is in Minnesota. So my brother and sisters really, taught me growing up. They learned sign language. My mother had 10 children. And I always knew that my culture was there. It was part of my identity. And my mom taught me that you are Indian first. You're Native. That's who you are. And that is your identity. And yes, you're deaf. And yes, of course, you're also a girl. And so all of these different things are a part of me. And as I grew up with my brothers and sisters, I would go to different events and ceremonies like powwows, and I learned so much from the elders and the community about trauma and the sad history and I ate it up. I wanted to learn everything that I could, and I was proud of my identity. So I was sent to a boarding school, which was a deaf school, to learn deaf culture. And my grandmother would not accept that. She knew the trauma that had come from boarding schools in our past, in our family. And so the damage that that's caused and the deprivation of identity and language, that deprivation in not being able to speak your language, that's something that she really fought against. She didn't want me to go to the deaf school at all and stay there. And I am so happy to know that, because I did have to go for a short while and that caused trauma. But when I came back home, I integrated into a mainstream school and was in special education, and I felt safer. I was in my environment because I was in my Native community. I started learning, where my journey was taking me and the importance of taking care of myself and understanding my identity. And I have experienced a lot of oppression from 4 different identity spaces, right? So I'm deaf, clearly. I'm also Native and oppressed in those ways as well. And then I'm a woman. and then fourth, I'm in the hearing world, which believes that deaf can't do, I don't know, you name it. But it's interesting because I always thought, well, the deaf is part of my identity, but when I would go and be in that space, I wasn't. Like, I felt shame, and I felt like I had to cover a lot of my different identities depending upon where I was. And so I set up the Indigenous Interpreters Organization with 4 other people, which has been moving along. There were 30 or 40 people that had showed up to discuss, how to be successful and what our people need as far as access and interpreting in different spaces, like Inipi, Sweat Lodge, or powwows, or singing, beading. My auntie earrings here. I bought these. I didn't make them myself, but just how to make and learn how to do our different Native things. And so when I went, I learned how to make a hand drum, which was, what a beautiful experience. Angela, the person voicing for me right now, was there as well, interpreting. And I went with a couple other people, and I felt inspired and like I was in a safe space. And people don't understand what that means for somebody to be in a safe space always, whether it's Indigenous or deaf. That's so important to have that. People, like interpreters, need to learn how to be able to interpret in those spaces for Native deaf people. And we have to have a lot of conversations about how to sign different things and how to sign things. And sometimes there's, some disagreement in different parts of the country, but yeah, just we need to get together and figure those things out. But we really try to use and develop that space and how many interpreters that we have working in Native spaces for the future. I really want people to be able to rise up and feel like they can do things and not that they can't do things because of oppression. And speaking of language deprivation, that also was something that was, such a powerful impact. For example, you're taught to respect your elders. That's a powerful lesson, and it's important for people in our life. And so when, to share stories. They share stories with us, and we listen and we learn, and then those stories are given to us, and they're a part of who we are, those stories, and then we continue to pass them on. We experience oppression, unfortunately, by the white agency owners of interpreters. They want to haggle things, and we have to fight to be able to be in Native spaces, to be interpreting. And so we really have to fight to be in our community and be able to do that work and do it qualified, and make sure that there are qualified people in those spaces. So for example, powwows, the jingle dancers at powwows are so beautiful, but a lot of times Native deaf people don't know, the story of the jingle dress. And so also another is the men's fancy dance. How would you sign that? When you think about it, when you see the sign that I do, you can imagine what that is. And so it's important to have those signs. My father had passed away. I'll share one story. My father had passed away, and I was grieving, and my brothers and sisters were trying to interpret for me. I remember it was really early, and they were interpreting, but they couldn't. I didn't want them to, because they were grieving so much as well. And I went and spoke with the medicine man and asked if they could provide an interpreter, but the interpreter was white, and they said no, they cannot, because it's a Native family and it's a private space. And I was saying, I know, I understand that. I just need to be able, I'm missing everything. It's my dad. He's one of the most important people in my life. And so I really had to learn to stand up for myself in that moment, because my brothers and sisters were grieving. It wasn't right for them to have to interpret. And so he finally agreed and accepted. But of course, the interpreter didn't speak Ojibwe, didn't have the Anishinaabe language. And so that was a time when IIO would have been such a wonderful gift to have. I know we really want to be able to connect with other people who are interpreters and help improve their signs in their own communities as well, and start working with people. And some Native interpreters, we need to lift them up. So the sign poem, saying I like poems, somebody had asked me, how do you interpret that? How do you sign that? And so that's what helps with access and having a different perspective, and seeing that different people have different perspectives. And on social media, you start, I'm seeing vlogs and stuff like that. And, a lot of times or like something on the radio, and we have to shift that. We have to shift that thinking and think differently about what access means. For reimagining Thanksgiving and how this all ties together, I'll tell you something that I learned from my family. How colonizers and the history behind that and the East Coast. I mean, that story is such a sad thing. There were so many tribes that were already there living. That was their home. And a lot of the East Coast became slaves. Like, for example, the Wampanoag were sent to the West, or to the West Indies. And a lot of those children and women also became slaves and ended up, slaves to the white people, the Puritans that were there. And during that time period, about 90% of our people died because of disease and illness and war. And now, we have this Thanksgiving celebration. It seems crazy to me, really. When you think of it from the perspective of, having a good meal and food with my family and friends, it's about food. It's about the feast. And do we think of it like Thanksgiving, like back in the 1621? I know that every person, talks about Thanksgiving and everything, but for us, like in New York, like the Macy's Day Parade and things like that, I think about those things and, oh, it'd be so fun to go and look, but then what does that look like? That is colonization at its finest, right? It's about money and corporations. And internally, I always knew that I have to be strong, and I need to work on my own health and healing. And I need to, if I want to help my people, then I need to work on that for myself. And language deprivation and culture deprivation, people need access to their ceremonies. They need to be given their native names. I was given my name and Miigwech, Angela came and interpreted for me, and another person who's just a dear, dear friend of mine, Sequoia Hawk. They both came to be there to make sure that I had access to in my home with my children when we were given our native name. Not everybody has that. We're lucky to have that, and it's so cherished in our space. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing for people to have access to that and to have access to things like this. And the colonizers are, I always have to change how I sign to white interpreters or even, white people that are deaf. I'm constantly code shifting and culture shifting internally, but I know our history and I know our trauma, and that will always be a part of who I am. And I will always be here to support Native communities because of the things we've experienced. And so I think that's everything I wanted to share, but I want to say thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I love you all, and thank you for watching Miigwech.
Thank you, Cindi. I'm really grateful for you to be able to share your story and also to help us.
Hold on 1 second while we get the interpreter on.
Okay.
All good.
Thank you, Reed. I just was saying how grateful I am that Cindi could be with us today, because it's really, really important. And I just, for us to understand the importance of what rethinking even accessibility is in our communities, and so that we can make things inclusive and accessible for Native deaf people. And that was a very powerful experience that you shared right now, Cindi, that helps us to think about those things and be more mindful and understanding, and also just being able to create that change inside ourselves to be able to connect. Thank you. Next is I would like to introduce Dr. Nahar with Anticolonial Arrivants, who will be guiding us on some messages and opportunities that we have to support.
Hello, I am Sarah Nahar, a brown-skinned woman with black curly hair and cornrows, and I'm wearing a big smile and a floral print jumper here that I've been wearing for about 40 hours since I just returned from Palestine to Turtle Island. And it's really meaningful to be with you here today as we rethink Thanksgiving, as this myth of the first American Thanksgiving feast is one of those false stories that we've been told, the story that erases unequal power relations and silences intense suffering of people and places, because colonialism is the problem and solidarity is the answer. And that's our story. So it's good to be with you, to reorient ourselves in these disorienting times, telling stories that hold the depths of our deep histories and lifeways. And there's so many ways that the nearly 500 of you out there are doing this. And so thank you for weaving with us today. And greetings to all those who are listening to the recording. This is the moment to open up your hearts and your wallets even further. I'm going to share a bit here, but the purpose of my time is to invite you to share. If we don't want it to be about money going to corporations, then we move the money to the people who are working with it, right? Lifting language access, creating ceremonies, challenging data centers, generating life-saving prophecies, and groups that are on the front lines. So let's move our money. And as you start clicking towards giving, I'll share some more, but the links are coming up in the chat. All right. So one of the ways that this Rethinking Thanksgiving call has helped the process of relearning and repairing and reconnecting is through launching Anticolonial Arrivants 3 years ago on this call. And Anticolonial Arrivants is a group that is dedicated to making space for those of us who are not Indigenous to Turtle Island, but who are also not white, to do our own work related to what it means to live here now, though our ancestors were brought here against our will. Or more recently, perhaps they arrived here due to imperialist economic violence in our ancestral places of origin. So for the people of color, people of the global majority, living on Turtle Island, there isn't a commonly used term for us who are not white or not Indigenous. Are we unwilling settlers? Are we guests? Forced immigrants? Arrivants is a term used by Caribbean poet Kamau Braithwaite and Indigenous scholar Jody Bird. That's a word that we've been working with in our Anti-Colonial Arrivants group, thinking about whether or not that can be a tool to help us form into a political force. And so I'm really grateful to Rethinking Thanksgiving for being a portal to help birth this group into being, because we're building a solidarity network to address colonialism. And on our quarterly calls, we come together to closely examine this emergent language, but most importantly, what decolonial solidarity means for us as non-Indigenous and non-white folks. So if you're a person of the global majority living on Turtle Island, or if you have a comrade you think would benefit, feel free to have them fill out the form to join the listserv, and you'll find that in the toolkit that Eve mentioned that will be coming afterwards. Keep clicking, keep donating, and I'll just keep sharing that while communities of color have experienced racist, Christian hegemonic colonial devastation, we also have financial, communal, and institutional resources. And so therefore, it is my honor to invite everyone, settlers and arrivants alike, to consider to make a donation now. Everyone has something to contribute. So for those of us here live, we're actually going to try to match what we did last year, which was $15,000 in small donations. Now, you don't have to give a small donation. You can definitely give a large donation. But we did it together, and we would love to bring that energy again. Because even as conditions have deteriorated over just this year in many places, our ability to connect with one another has deepened. So please feel free to share in the chat if you've just donated. It's not a brag, it's not a flex, but it's just important to know, if someone is taking the risk to donate, let them know that they're not alone. So thank you to those who are sharing that they have donated. We appreciate that. Here comes some of the evidence of solidarity. We have a flow coming in. And if you're using the recording, Also, right now, just page back to the original email in which this link was in and click there. You'll see the donation links.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr. Nahar. And let me get my camera on. Sorry.
No,
Thank you,
thank
Dr.
you.
Nahar. Our next presenter is Nisrin, and it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Elamin. Nisrin Elamin is an assistant professor of African Studies and Anthropology at the University of Toronto, and she is currently writing a book tentatively titled Stratified Enclosures, Land, Gulf Capital, and Empire Making in Central Sudan. While focuses on Gulf Arab and land investments in Sudan and community resistance to state-driven processes of land dispossession. Nisrin is also a member of the Sudan Solidarity Collective based in so-called Canada, which provides material support to mutual aid networks and unions at the forefront of relief efforts in Sudan. Welcome, Nisrin.
Thank you so much. My name is Nisrin. I use she, her pronouns.
Hold on just 1 second. I'm sorry. We're just spotlighting the interpreter.
Thank you. So my name is Nisrin. I use she, her pronouns. I'm calling in from the U.S. colony of Boriken on the unceded lands of the Taínos. I'm a Black woman with black and gray dreads pulled back. I'm wearing a black shirt, a blue patterned silk bandana, and yellow earrings. I'd like to thank my long-term friend Anayan Segarza, Reed, Donna, my interpreter Angela, and everyone else who poured labor, love, and care into making this virtual gathering happen. I'm very grateful and honored to be here, and I've already learned so much from Cindi and Eve and everybody else. Before I begin, I want to take a moment to honor and remember the many martyrs of Sudan's ongoing revolution and the countless people in Sudan, Palestine, the Congo, the settler colonies of North America, and elsewhere who have lost their lives due to state violence. I'm with the Sudan Solidarity Collective, which formed in the aftermath of the war in Sudan to, among other things, support mutual aid groups and unions at the forefront of relief efforts. Through people giving $10, $20, $50 a month, we've raised over $1 million to support their life-saving work and have been able to sustain this support. We also focus on community building, political education, organizing around racist immigration policies, and are beginning to think about joint divestment and arms embargo campaigns. I want to do two things today. One, I want to explain what is happening in Sudan, and then move to talking about food sovereignty within the context of war, how people are organizing within that context, and how people can connect to that work. The war in Sudan has received very little mainstream media attention, despite the fact that it's produced the world's largest displacement, humanitarian, and hunger crisis. And when it does get some coverage, it's presented as a faraway civil war that has nothing to do with us. This is about the racist assumption that war is somehow a natural way of being for us as Africans. We see images of starving Black bodies make the front page of the New York Times with no context, no history, no analysis of the local and external forces like the IMF and World Bank, like Gulf and North American extractivism that have produced famine in a country that could easily feed itself. So the first point I want to make is that war is never a natural state of being. War is big business for local and international elites for whom the faraway of wars in places like Sudan is a constructed convenience providing cover for their extractive profit-making. In doing research for a divestment campaign at the University of Toronto, we discovered, for instance, that some of the same weapons manufacturing companies supplying the Israeli occupation forces are also supplying the UAE, which supports the Rapid Support Forces in Sudan as it commits genocide in Darfur, and the Rwandan Defense Forces implicated in the war and 29-year plunder of the Congo. This network of corporate murderers are connected across borders and states, which means our organizing against them needs to be as well. I don't have time to delve into the historical and colonial roots of this war. For that, I suggest reading Skopas Pogo and Amir Idris's work. But I think it's important not to exceptionalize this current war in Sudan, because state violence, particularly against indigenous non-Arab communities, has long been shaped by the need to reproduce an extractive, violent, ethno-nationalist state that serves elite interests by any means necessary. In 2018, a powerful revolution emerged in Sudan that overthrew the brutal dictatorship of Umar al-Bashir after 30 years in power. The backbone of this revolution are neighborhood resistance committees, of which there are about 8,000 across the country, but also independent farmer and labor unions, which organize protests, strikes, and boycotts against the military council that grabbed power after al-Bashir was ousted. These committees became the driving force of the revolution, organizing and providing for people's needs at the neighborhood level, after a power-sharing government formed made up of civilian and military elites from the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, that was supposed to move us towards democratic elections. On October of 2021, these military elites staged a joint counter-revolutionary coup. Is everything okay? Okay. A joint counter-revolutionary coup, derailing Sudan's transition to civilian rule. In the aftermath of the coup, as people put their lives on the line, organizing protests and strikes against the coup regime, UN peace talks, led by the US, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and UK, legitimized the coup leaders, Burhan, head of SAF, and Hemeti, head of RSF, both responsible for war crimes that span decades, framing them as potential reformists rather than listening to the resistance committees, which called for no negotiations, no legitimacy, and no partnership with the military. And this insistence on prioritizing stability over revolutionary demands is partly what paved the way for this war. In April of 2023, this military coup regime imploded and split, with each faction vying not only for political but also economic control of the country. On one hand, we have the Rapid Support Forces, formerly known as the Janjaweed, largely responsible for the genocide in Darfur in the early 2000s, whose leaders control some of the livestock and much of the illicit gold trade in the country. Sudan is Africa's third largest producer of gold, and the United Arab Emirates, as its main trading partner, is now providing critical military support to the RSF as it extracts Sudanese gold. 90% of this gold leaves RSF and army territories and ends up in the gold markets of Dubai, where the Emiratis exported $47 billion worth of gold last year. Trade between the US and the UAE reached $34 billion last year. The US imports gold and gum arabic from the UAE. That is likely smuggled out of Sudan. And they also exported $500 million worth of weapons to the Emirates last year, which is why we need a US arms embargo and trade restrictions on the UAE until it stops funding the RSF. On the other hand, we have the Sudanese Armed Forces and its allied Islamists, who control 70% of Sudan's economy. Close to 200 companies in rubber, livestock, wheat, cement, real estate, etc. Egypt supports the army to protect its interests in the Red Sea region and in relation to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, and Ukraine have also supported the army in exchange for Sudanese resources like livestock. Russia is playing both sides by trading gold with the RSF and port space along the Red Sea with the army. I could talk to you today about the statistics this war has produced. The 14 million Sudanese who have been displaced many multiple times from resource-rich lands that are now being used to fuel this war. The 19 million children who are out of school. The 30 million at the brink of starvation. The 75% of funds the international community has yet to commit to fund an adequate relief effort. The estimated 150 to 500,000 killed. In this moment, after 18 months of brutal siege, the RSF are committing genocide as they take full control of El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur. While 99,000 civilians have managed to flee El Fasher in recent days, over 150,000 civilians remain trapped inside the city with no access to food or healthcare as the RSF carries out brutal massacres in a targeted ethnic cleansing campaign against indigenous non-Arab communities with weapons produced partly in Canada, so-called Canada. Pools of blood and dead bodies are now visible through satellite images from space. But statistics have been part of the problem in that they help naturalize, decontextualize, and depoliticize man-made crises that provide cover for violent resource extraction and dispossession. So instead, I want to talk to you about life. Within hours of the war breaking out, I witnessed people in our neighborhood mobilize evacuations and chart safe exit routes for people, activate medicine and bed drives for people with limited mobility and resources. People were literally dodging bullets, trying to bring elders buckets of water from the Nile. For people who were able to successfully flee their cities, rural people opened their homes and fed them as they continued observing Ramadan. Soon, emergency response rooms emerged out of the existing network of the 8,000 resistance committees led by thousands of volunteers. In the face of a barely present international aid community and absent state, people are leading food and medicine distribution efforts, organizing communal kitchens, driving ambulances, coordinating evacuations, setting up ad hoc emergency clinics and rape crisis centers, repairing and restoring water and electricity services, and retrieving and burying dead bodies. In Al Fasher, organizers are evacuating people in the midst of unimaginable violence and are organizing clandestine underground food drives. Some of the 700 emergency response rooms across the country are growing food and providing psychosocial support to survivors. They are running a country in the absence of a state. They are insisting on staying put, on living and on sustaining each other to live form of resistance against the militarized state and the many forms of violence it produces. One of the questions we have to ask ourselves is why Sudan is experiencing a hunger crisis in a country that could easily feed itself and the entire region. This is partly because this famine has been decades in the making. In the 80s and 90s, Sudan's rural communities experienced a wave of devastating privatization policies that dispossessed farmers and herders. Sorry, I think the person is frozen. Okay. Of communal lands and concentrated land in the hands of elites, which was facilitated by IMF structural adjustment policies and World Bank recommendations. In the early 2000s, the Bashir regime continued to implement neoliberal policies to privatize the rural sector and withdrew state services from small farmers in order to attract foreign investments in land. Since the early 2000s, Saudi and Emirati elites have invested over $27 billion in Sudanese land, real estate, and infrastructure, and controlled more Sudanese land than all of Sudan's domestic investors combined before the war. These shifts in land ownership forced small farmers into debt, forced them to sell land to state and business elites. And so in addition to foreign land grabs, we've seen a mushrooming of domestic agribusiness farms, which primarily grow animal feed that is exported to dairy farms in the Middle East to boost domestic corporate and Gulf Arab dairy and meat industries. They then flood rural and urban markets with meat and dairy products that decimate local small-scale production, pushing people off of lands and livelihoods and into the militarized state as the foot soldiers of the state's violent counterinsurgency campaigns. So there's a connection between land dispossession and the expansion of the militarized state. It is among dispossessed Arab-identified pastoralists who used to produce milk that the RSF, as one of Sudan's now biggest employers, and even the army, have found their most willing recruits. There's also a US connection. US food assistance has been transferred to the US Department of Agriculture after USAID was dissolved, with the aim of dumping subsidized US grain onto food insecure markets in the Horn of Africa like Sudan through US food aid programs in order to undermine local production, open up new markets for US products. And as the former head of the World Food Program, David Beasley, who's also a former Republican senator, declared right before this war, also to attract US investments in Sudanese land. As food assistance to poor and working class folks are being rolled back in the US, billions are being diverted through the Farm Bill and other legislation towards subsidizing US agribusiness production and purchasing US grain for US food aid programs. So this is how the politics of hunger in the US and the so-called US is connected to the politics of hunger in Sudan. Which is why it's inspiring that the Jazeera and Managil Farmers Alliance in Sudan's agricultural heartland launched a We Must Plant campaign last year, through which they have distributed vegetable seeds to 2,400 families. Just weeks after the RSF committed massacres on the land, people began to grow food for nourishment and recovery on it. Families across the Jazeera are now growing subsistence food within their compounds and have created iftars with the food they grew and bartered with each other during Ramadan. Beyond allowing people to feed themselves, the alliance is enabling Sudanese farmers to remain and return to land at a time when the risk of land grabs is high, particularly once the guns are silenced. If you'd like to support any of these groups, you can go to sudansolidarity.com. So I'll end with this. As my friend, the Palestinian poet Suhair Hamad reminds us, it is our duty in these times of multiple genocides to affirm life. There are only two sides, as Suhair puts it. There are those that affirm life and those that are against it. You are either with life or against it. And we are here today because we affirm life. I hope you feel inspired by the Sudanese Emergency Response Room volunteers and Farm Alliance workers who are organizing in the midst of war and genocide to keep organizing in your own communities while finding small ways to connect your work to Sudan. I hope we can work together to disrupt the profit flows that are devastating the planet and fueling genocide and war by connecting the struggles of our indigenous kin fighting for their land back, our Jamaican kin fighting the impact of climate colonialism, our kin in the Southern Caribbean and Venezuela under US imperial attack, our kin in Tigray, Haiti, Congo, and Palestine bearing the brunt of imperial violence and genocide, and anyone else I may have forgotten. We can and must hold each other across borders because our collective liberation depends on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nisrin. Thank you, and for people that are looking on ways to support everything that was just said with regards to the Sudan Solidarity Collective. They are based in so-called Canada, so there are links on that are very important for you to donate through PayPal to their efforts. Next, we have our presenter, Lara. Lara Kiswani is from Akir and Beit Iksa, Palestine, and is the executive director of the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, known as AROC, serving and organizing thousands of working class Arabs and Muslims across the so-called San Francisco Bay Area. AROC leads local, regional, and national campaigns to challenge racism, war, and genocide. Lara has worked in movements for racial justice for over 25 years. Lara, thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all the panelists and organizers. This has been so inspiring, and I've already learned so much. My name is Lara Kiswani. I'm Palestinian. I'm a brown woman with black hair wearing a black shirt that says BDS across my chest. As Palestinians, we understand our movement as part of the global struggle against settler colonialism, and we understand our struggle against Israeli apartheid as a struggle also against ethno-supremacy, white supremacy, religious supremacy, fascism, and right-wing authoritarianism. And as Nisrin and others have so eloquently articulated, we know these systems of oppression are not separate. They are tools used to exploit and dominate indigenous people and land, from manifest destiny on Turtle Island to Zionist colonization of Palestine to fascist coups, propped up dictators, co-opted revolutions across the global South. So what we're witnessing today in Palestine is not something that is new, and it is not a moment in time. It is an extension of a long history of Western imperialism. It is part of a 77-year struggle against Western-backed Israeli colonial violence and dispossession, and it is part of an 18 years of brutal, inhumane siege on Gaza, backed and made possible by the economic, the military, and the political support of the United States government. So when we say free Palestine, we're naming a fight against a whole system that treats some lives as expendable, some homelands as empty, and some people as obstacles to be removed. And needless to say, these last 2 years have been devastating. Our people, my people, have suffered beyond measure. There isn't a single Palestinian anywhere who hasn't lost family in this genocide or doesn't intimately know somebody who has. I myself have lost more than 4 dozen relatives since October 7th, 2023. I never had the privilege of meeting them because of the decades of siege and occupation of Gaza. My maternal grandmother, her family, and her entire village were forcibly displaced by Zionist militias in 1948, and then were made internally displaced refugees. First, they were displaced and fled to Gaza. Later, many of them, including my grandparents, were exiled and made refugees in the neighboring country of Jordan, where most of my family still lives now, forbidden from visiting any part of Palestine, let alone Gaza. So the loved ones we lost in Gaza are relatives that they have been separated from since the creation of the colonial state of Israel in 1948. For 18 years, Palestinians in Gaza have been subjugated to a military siege that cuts them off from the rest of the world and traps them in an open-air prison, 2 million people. That siege has meant chronic shortages of life-saving medicine, food, electricity, and clean water. and it's designed to make life unbearable. So the US funded and armed Israeli genocide in Gaza that we are witnessing live streamed on our phones today is being inflicted on an already besieged and displaced people. And this can really feel very daunting, right? We are living in some unprecedented times, both here in the United States, across Turtle Island, and globally. But we're also, and I think we have to remind ourselves that the rise of right-wing authoritarianism from apartheid Israel to the United States is a direct response to the gains won by our social movements. And it is an agenda representing the interest of an extreme minority that cannot truly sustain a popular mandate. So, of course, they rely on violence. They rely on criminalization and other forms of repression, spreading into our towns and cities, targeting our communities and our organizations. We know that healthcare, education, housing, dignity, peace, self-determination, our ideals and our values and principles are really those of the majority of people across the world. But even though we have history on our side, the levers of power seem to not be. And that's why we have to be that much more strategic, that much more organized, and that much more coordinated. When it comes to the critical issue my people are facing, right-wing Israeli authoritarianism and colonialism in my homeland, we know that it's going to be a very difficult uphill battle. But the solidarity amongst colonized people, the solidarity amongst oppressed people, the solidarity of all those at the receiving end of the systems of oppression is at unprecedented scale in this moment. The majority of people around the world are demanding an end to U.S. aid to Israel. The right knows our struggles are connected. They've put trans people in the crosshairs, the organizations that defend them in the crosshairs, healthcare workers who provide gender-affirming care in the crosshairs, Palestinian solidarity, the right to organize in the crosshairs, immigrants in the crosshairs. They put movements for racial justice in the crosshairs, and they've in fact put even democracy or any potential democracy itself in the crosshairs, because they understand that we are a threat to their narrow agenda. So we need to understand that our solidarity is not just a moral imperative. It is our weapon, and it is necessary if we are to win, because the forces stacked against us see no difference between us, and because our struggles are tied, and so are our fates. In Palestine, the right-wing authoritarian state that has been carrying out this decades-long occupation and genocide is fully aligned with the billionaire and right-wing agenda. So let's take, for example, Israel's role in the arms industry. As you all know, the arms industry is making billions of dollars of profit from weapons sold and used in wars, and by militarization of police and even law enforcement, along with being the largest recipient of aid from the United States. Israel is one of the world's leading weapons exporters. The arms used against working people in this country and around the world are more often than not tested on my people first, people in Gaza specifically. And long before October 7th, 2023, it's been known that Gaza has been a testing ground for Israeli weapons, surveillance, and war technology. So let's take a moment to think about what that means and how the situation in Palestine really reflects the twisted political and economic priorities of the United States and the billionaire class. We live in the wealthiest country in human history. Everything a majority of people in this country want is being attacked and denied. Education, healthcare, dignity at work, right relationships to land and the environment. And then when we watch as our tax dollars are being used to supply bombs and ammunitions to the apartheid state of Israel and other human rights violating regimes to drop bombs on everything we are actually fighting for. So myself as a Palestinian, yourselves and others around the world and around this country are paying taxes not to fund Medicare for all or towards education, jobs, or housing. Instead, money's going right out of our pockets and to fund genocides and war, to bomb hospitals and destroy every home in Gaza. But there's a flip side to this, right? So as all the hospitals in Gaza are gone, and yes, we've seen the images of children, elders, healthcare workers being bombed and shot at. But we have also seen that every single time a hospital is attacked, it's the nurses, it's the doctors, it's the healthcare workers that are running towards those buildings being bombed, running towards the harm, doing their job, trying by every means necessary to provide care and save lives. These are the heroes, the living heroes that we need to acknowledge in this moment. This is the living agenda of the people that is such a threat to the colonization of Palestine, but really to colonization and war and empire everywhere. Gaza, as we have said many times before, will never be the same, but neither will the world. Gaza has indeed changed the world. It has stripped bare the US and Western partnership with Israel, and it has ignited unprecedented global resistance. We have witnessed solidarity from every walk of life, from the bold actions of trade unionists to everyday care from working people in our neighborhoods. I know that the majority of people around me in the world understand that when entire people are made expendable, absolutely no one is safe. But times like this, even though they are important to name the connections and the markers of history, they're not just about our morals and values. They are reminders of how we need to get organized and we need to build across movements. In our struggle against fascism and colonialism, we must carefully, really methodically bring together as many people, as many organizations, as many sectors as possible to block the worst of our adversaries and what they have to offer while building our durable power in this moment. And we learn from history, we learn from one another that the task is not only to bend the arc of history towards global justice, but it's also to transform our current conditions and the social and economic priorities so that justice isn't just achieved, but it's actually secured, and there's a foundation set for a different type of world and life. So as we continue to confront the violence of colonialism and genocide, the rise of fascism, the co-optation of revolutions, global authoritarianism, we're also reminded of the legacies of that resistance and the legacies of resistance that not only shape our histories, but offer us much needed lessons in this moment. Our freedom movements, the Black freedom struggle, the Indigenous movement for land back, the Palestinian movements against genocide, understanding that all of the ravages of white supremacy.
Sorry, we're going to pause you. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Our movements, our freedom movements, the land back struggles of Indigenous people, the Black freedom struggles, the Palestinian movement against genocide, understand all too well that the ravages of white supremacy, of ethno-supremacy, of religious supremacy, and right-wing authoritarianism are a threat to everybody. And our freedom movements are also a critical element of any front against fascism right here in the United States. For Palestinians, the fight against colonial violence and genocide is part of a generational struggle of our people against fascism in our homeland and against US support for a fascist colonial project. And together here, I think, and across the world, we've made it so that the movement to end Israel's genocide in Gaza has been one of the largest anti-war movements in history. So there is an opportunity here, right? Especially if we understand the connections between our movements and the potentials and gains that can be made possible once we understand our fates are in fact connected. Abolishing apartheid and fascism in Palestine is in fact inseparable from the international fight for economic and political democracy for all people, for education and healthcare for all, for right relations to land, for the freedom of movement of all people, for the freedom of all political prisoners, right? And for social, for gender and climate justice, shaped by working people. As our South African comrades have taught us over the years in their fight against apartheid, it always seems impossible until it's done. And these times seem very hard everywhere. The stacks are up against us. But we have to believe that our victory is inevitable. My father also died last year. He was older than the State of Israel. And one of the founders of the State of Israel said, "The old will die and the young will forget." And as our Indigenous siblings note all too well, this is sadly a pretty common sentiment amongst colonial projects. My father died in diaspora, witnessing the genocide of our people. But his story was not forgotten, and he was not erased, and neither was my family or I. And I, because of the solidarity that we have built over the several decades in this country and around the world, I believe that his grandchild, right, my 2-year-old daughter, will see a free Palestine in which people of all backgrounds, all faiths and belief can live in peace and freedom and democracy. And just as the struggle for a free Palestine emboldens the repressive systems across the world and of other right-wing authoritarian regimes, Palestinian solidarity, I believe, expands the terrain for all social movements to challenge militarism, to challenge surveillance, to challenge repression, and to really fight for collective liberation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara. I really am grateful for your message that and your reminder to us that we are here because somebody survived, and our lives are very precious in the changes that we make to work for an inevitable liberation. Next, we're going to hear from Raji, who is part of the Indigenous Solidarity Network.
Hello, everyone. My name is Raji. I'm a white trans femme. I am wearing a pink jacket. I have pink hair, I have purple lipstick, and I have Palestine earrings on. And I am here to again ask you to support the organizations of these incredible speakers. I am so moved. I am so inspired. I am challenged. I am expanded. And I think a lot of you are too. I hope a lot of you are too. There's still hundreds of people on this webinar. And as Dr. Nahar reminded us, there will be probably hundreds more who watch the recording. So ask that you think about something you learned, something you were moved by, and from that place, make a donation right now at one of the links. There's 2 links. There's an Act Blue link, which is a tax-deductible donation that splits between Tonatierra, which is Eve's organization, Arab Resource and Organizing Center, which is Lara's, AROC, which is Lara's organization, and then splits to cover webinar expenses. And then the PayPal goes to Sudan Solidarity Collective, which is Nisrin's organization, which is based in so-called Canada. And just really want to ask that we give what we're able, whatever amount that is, to support this critical organizing that's happening. Thank you for Shay in the chat contributing $180. Can anyone match? Shay asked. Thank you for that. We ask, yes, please share the replay of the webinar with others. We ask whatever is a meaningful amount for you. And I also just want to name that we know giving is classed. We know that working class folks give more, and folks that have wealth tend to give less. So we actually ask that people who have access to money and wealth through family, please give a generous amount. Also through the Act Blue, you can give a recurring donation. So you could give a monthly donation of $5, $10, $20 that will support these organizations throughout the year. We chose colonialism is the problem, solidarity is the answer. And every speaker spoke to that so powerfully. And part of that solidarity is our funding, that we give donations to organizations and leaders that are doing the work. That is part of the solidarity. As a white person, and this is a webinar focused on decolonization, ask that all the folks, white folks on this call, please give very generously. As settlers to these lands, that is our responsibility for supporting these movements and being part of these movements, not just to donate, but also to donate. There were so many quotes and so many things I learned and I wrote down, but just Lara's ending, some of the last things that she said, just reflecting that solidarity is at unprecedented levels and solidarity is our weapon, and that we have to believe that our victory is inevitable. And I believe that. And I know that we have to work extremely hard for that to be true in every way, including funding movements that are going to make that victory inevitable and make that victory come as soon as possible. The incredible sharing of Nisrin about the popular committees and their incredible resistance, that deserves all the support we can offer. Hearing Cindi and the incredible work of empowering deaf Indigenous communities and her sharing that with us, and Eve speaking about the work of Tonatierra, speaking about Tonatierra, an organization that grounds this webinar and has for years, grounds international global connections amongst Indigenous peoples. These are the organizations we're supporting today. These are the organizations we're asking you all to support. So please give to both links. Please share in the link. Please share in the chat as you're donating. And again, often on these webinars, we have hundreds of people and not everyone donates. And that's okay. If you can't donate, we're so glad you're here. That is the most important thing. We ask that you share the webinar. We ask that you share the donation link, but also for the hundreds of people that don't donate but could, we ask that you donate. Support grassroots leadership, support Indigenous leadership, support organizations that do this work every single day of the year, not just on Rethinking Thanksgiving, and have done this work for many, many years and decades, and intergenerationally, which so many speakers spoke to, across generations. As Nisrin said, we can and must hold each other across borders because our collective liberation depends on it. And when we think about what that means for our collective liberation to depend on it, to depend on our solidarity, what does that mean in terms of money? There's no monetary amount for that. I don't have $1 million. I would give it because that would be the amount. There is no amount, right? But for what we can give, please ask that you give that, whatever that is. I did not track my time, so someone please cut me off when it's time. Until that moment, I ask that you please keep giving. Ask that the links continue to be dropped in the chat for donations. And ask that people continue to share as you donate. Again, every amount is meaningful, $5, $5,000. And if there is a recurring donation possible, please do that. Support the organizations throughout the year. Do $9 as a recurring donation on ActBlue that will be split between the organizations, or whatever is a meaningful amount for you. And again, ask that, when this webinar goes out, please share it. You can also send this link around. Whatever you do on this Thursday, some people it's a day of mourning, some people it's a time to be with family. You can share this link with friends. You can share this webinar with friends, and ask that this is a meaningful way for people to support Indigenous-led organizing, to financially is one meaningful way.
Thank you,
And it's
Raji.
not the only way, but it's an important way.
Thank you, Raji, for
Thank you.
reminding us to support this work. And now we're going to bring people on camera so that we can see all of our panelists, so that we can continue to have a discussion now. So I want to welcome Eve, Cindi.
Hold on 1 second. The interpreter's not on.
Okay.
Okay, good.
So I'd like to welcome now Eve, Cindi, Nisrin, and Lara back for a conversation to close us out, reflecting on what each one of you has said. Is there anything that you would like to add from, or that any connections listening to each other that you made? For example, what really jumped out to me was that quote, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And I think that that's something that we all have experienced as people who wouldn't, some of us, right, people who would not be here, like I said, if somebody hadn't fought to live. And that's exactly what we're doing.
Well, if it's okay with the permission of my co-presenters, first of all, I just want to say thank you all for everything that you shared today. For those who don't know, us as speakers, we haven't met in person or only know of each other's work. At least for me, I only know of each other's work through this webinar. So I also got to learn so much about the work that's being done. And it goes back to just this big, feeling of love in my heart regarding the solidarity that we have been showing each other. These issues are just so important. And I think, what comes to mind when I think of our ancestors whose legacies we are carrying forward is the fact that we can watch what's happening in all around the world in real time, and the fact that, we have these tools to be able to support one another. We're able to support our relatives in Sudan and in Palestine because of these connections that we're making. And there's something, I know we've been talking a lot about quotes, but there's something I wanted to share with you all that we've been using and hearing in our movements. And it's, we are the ones we have been waiting for. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We're not waiting for anybody to come and save us. And I think our sister Nisrin gave a very good example of how the community efforts are so important, of people responding on the ground. Our Palestinian relatives who are far away, they have the support of community grassroots organizing that's happening on the ground. And the importance of including everybody in that work. Our differently abled bodies. Our sister Lara, I feel the pain that you suffer. I feel Lara and our sister Cindi when it comes to losing our fathers. I lost my father just a few weeks ago. So I understand that feeling, and not being able to grieve the way that Cindi would have liked to because of those blockades and barriers. Indigenous way of thinking is everyone has a place in our community. We've always had a place in our community. There's never been exclusions in anything that we've done culturally. And it's so important for us to uplift and support and remember those teachings that our ancestors have given to us. We all have a role. And I think it's just so important to continue this solidarity, to continue to support the work in whatever way we can. The way what Raji said earlier, $1, $5 is wonderful, but also some of us don't have that money, right? A lot of us do this work for free. A lot of us are doing this because it's what we believe is needed. And it's even weird to call it work because it's not work. Like our elder Tupac would say, it's just the right thing to do. And we can all do the right thing even if we can't give monetarily, I mentioned before that we'll be sending out a toolkit and it'll have the names of organizations. And if you're not able to give your money, if you're able to give your time, as I'm speaking right now, outside of the office here, we have a organization called the Black Mesa Resistance Camp, and they are boxing up food for elders in Black Mountain, in Black Mesa, up in Big Mountain in the Navajo Reservation. They're doing that work on a Sunday, out of their own time. They have their children out there helping. And so this is what I'm talking about when I say we are the ones we have been waiting for. It's no one will save us but ourselves. And we have to do that with everything that we have, whether it's sharing these quotes, whether it's donating your money, whether it's donating your time, or one of the most important things that we don't talk about is just educating even our own children in our own home about what's happening in the world and how their tiny voices make so much of a difference to everybody. So I just wanted to share that much. We will be sharing the resources. I know there was a question about the water usage for AI. We have a website that we'll be sharing where you can get that information because it does vary depending on where you're coming from and what the uses are. We will share resources on the various organizations that are also part of our sponsors that you didn't get to hear about. And I love, Lara, seeing your little one there. Thank you for putting her on the screen because that is a perfect reminder of why we are doing the work that we are doing, why we make the sacrifices that we do. And I hope that each and everyone who's here on this webinar will know that you can make a difference as well. Anything that you can do, even if it's just speaking these words, sharing the webinar, making people aware of what's happening. What's been happening in Sudan has been happening for so long, and it's so awful that we're not hearing more about it. And so I just wanted to say that much and thank my co-panelists here. And I also wanted to thank our tech crew, our ASL interpreters, all of the translators. Everything that you do helps bring in those folks that we need to help and also find support in as well. So just wanted to say thank you so much and uplift all of the team who made this webinar possible. It really does take a village and we can do it. We're doing it now. So thank you so much. That's all I wanted to share.
I just wanted to sorry. I just wanted to say that just so everybody is aware that Indigenous Interpreters Organization is a business, not a nonprofit. So they're not receiving tax-exempt donations right now, if that's what you'd like to do, but they are being paid for the participation on tonight's webinar, and they are you can reach out to them for your events, right? For your events, for your webinars, for ceremonies, for the powwows, for different gatherings. It's really important. We heard Cindi, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about this, Cindi, but just how important it is when we say that it's a collective struggle. It's really important to rethink that and really provide the access and the collective part, right, where everybody is able to be a part of it. I'm not sure if the interpreter is on.
I am here. 1 second. Wait, I'm gonna pin Cindi on my screen. 1 second. First of all, I want to say, Miigwech, thank you for having me here tonight. We are setting up a nonprofit organization. The hope is that we'll have our nonprofit status next year. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate, being able to share. You can find us on Instagram and Instagram as well if you do need interpreters. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Nisrin, did you have anything else to add? Again, a reminder that the Sudan Solidarity Collective is based out of so-called Canada Tonatierra, and so in order to support the work there, you'll have to do so through the PayPal link that was provided in the chat.
I just wanted to say thank you again for inviting me to be part of this gathering. I've learned so much from my co-panelists, and I'm just like, my heart is full, and I hope that we continue to build together, because I think that's sort of the path to liberation, is to continue building together. And thank you to everybody who's here today, whether you donated or not. We appreciate you, and that's all. Thank you.
I did have a question. Well, on a previous conversation with you, Nisrin, you had we were talking about the role that food plays, and I know you touched upon that. But also I feel that it's something that is really relevant with what happened to a lot of people that were affected by, who were really afraid of not getting some of the assistance that they need, and the way food and the U.S. Department of Agriculture plays a role, and people are not really aware of that. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I also wrote a piece that I can link here in Transitions magazine called "The Politics of Hunger in Sudan" that makes some of those connections. But I mean, essentially, it's that USAID was, which of course is its own form of kind of soft colonial power, was shut down. But I think, and part of the problem though with that is that it had created a dependency for a lot of people, including a lot of the communal kitchens, for example, in Sudan had been funded by USAID. So for them to close so quickly was also quite violent in its own way. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the withdrawal of the US military in Afghanistan, right? When that kind of withdrawal happens, it's often done in a very violent way. But so it's now food aid is sort of oh, thank you so much, Ben. Food aid has moved to essentially under the auspices of the USDA, which strangely enough, I've also noticed are taking on a bigger role at borders, for example. Like they're sort of, I think, being baked into the military state in a way that's, or the police state in ways that are also important for us to watch, right? Because I do think that, again, what they're trying to do, I think, is to, subsidize U.S. agribusiness has to get rid of its excess grain in order to keep the price of U.S. grain at a certain level, right? If there's too much, then the price goes down too much. So it then needs markets, right, to dump that subsidized grain onto, and they're using U.S. food aid to do that. And they're targeting specifically food insecure sort of conflict zones. So for me, I think one of the things that I'm really worried about is disaster capitalism and sort of what happens after the guns are silenced, right? Who rebuilds, who is feeding people before they can return to their land and return to growing food, which is why I think the Farmers Alliance is so important. We haven't given them much support because they're mostly needing money for seeds and to clean irrigation canals and ditches that have been purposefully destroyed by the RSF, for example. And that's, I think, a very, it's like a genocidal tactic. I think that also happens in Palestine, where people, the Israeli occupation force is also grabbing land and destroying the possibility of returning to it, right? By destroying kind of critical infrastructure. So then, like NAFTA in Mexico, with the Mexican corn industry, it will undermine with food aid, US food aid being dumped onto these markets, local production. And that then pushes people off of their land into the militarized state. So yeah, I just think that that's something for us to be very aware of, in the sense that, like, even around food, the fact that there's food stamps are being cut is because that money is going to subsidize US agribusiness in order to open up these markets, right? That's part of it, I think. So yeah.
Thank you. And Lara, I wanted to give you an opportunity if you had anything else you had wanted to say.
Just deeply appreciative of all of you. It's a little hard to talk at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And so for our wrap up, we'd just like to follow up with letting you know that there's going to be an email sent out with the recording of the webinar. There's also a toolkit called Rethinking Thanksgiving. And there's going to be a follow up webinar intake form for people to be able to give us some feedback. And there's also going to be we're going to share with you ways that you can take action. They were also posted in the chat. And we just wanted to give a thank you to all of the speakers, all of the presenters. And thank you again, like Evie said, to all of the ASL and Spanish interpreters, live caption writers, and tech support, chat moderators. And thank you to all of the people that came together in this moment, as well as all the people behind the scenes that always make things possible. Everybody who was present today to listen and to share, whether you shared in the chat or you're going to go home and you're going to share that with your family or with your friends. This is how the ripple effect, right, makes all that change. And just wanted to thank everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Anayance. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, everyone.